So you think you know the Everglades, airboats, alligators, and the endless sawgrass south of Miami. But you have no idea that one of the most famous wild places in America isn't a swamp at all. And what's really down there is far stranger and far darker than the postcard. There's a nuclear missile base hidden in here, fish too poisoned to eat, and a sky that's lost nearly all its birds in a single lifetime. So here are 35 facts that are either going to surprise you or unsettle you. Let's dive in. Fact 35. The only overlap. There is exactly one place on the planet where wild alligators and wild crocodiles share the same water, and it's here. American alligators rule the freshwater marshes inland. American crocodiles work the salty mangrove coast. In the Everglades, fresh water bleeds into salt across a single gradient, so their ranges meet. Around 200,000 alligators live in the system. The crocodiles are rarer, roughly 2,000 in all of Florida, clawed back from just 150 in the 1970s. And you can find both within an hour of downtown Miami. Two apex predators with two continents worth of reputation in one stretch of American swamp, nowhere else on Earth. Fact 34. The snakes that won. People assume the python panic is overblown. A few escaped pets in a big swamp. The data says otherwise. Burmese pythons, loose in the Everglades since the 1990s, now number somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000, and they've hollowed out the food web. Road surveys published in 2012 found raccoon sightings down 99.3%, opossums 98.9%, white-tailed deer 94%. These snakes top 18 feet and swallow prey whole, and Florida has no native predator that eats them. In July 2025 alone, one state team pulled 748 of them out of the marsh. It barely moved the needle. Fact 33. The inland sea. Florida hides a lake so wide you can stand at its center and see no shore in any direction. Sailors have capsized on it, convinced they drifted out to open ocean. Lake Okeechobee covers 730 square miles, larger than New York City and Los Angeles combined. The second largest freshwater lake entirely inside the lower 48. It's the beating heart of the whole Everglades system, and it averages just 9 feet deep. A lake the size of a small country, shallower than the deep end of a swimming pool. Fact 32. Worth more than gold. For about 30 years, the most valuable thing in the Everglades wasn't land or timber, it was feathers. In the 1890s, the breeding plumes of snowy egrets sold for around $32 an ounce, roughly twice the price of gold, to feed a fashion for feathered hats. Hunters raided the nesting colonies until Florida's wading birds crashed from about 2 million to 500,000. In 1905, a warden named Guy Bradley, hired to protect them, was shot dead in his boat near Flamingo. His murder became a national scandal that helped drive the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918. People died over hats. Fact 31. Empire built on fish. Everything you've been taught says complex civilizations begin with farming. The Calusa never got the message. For roughly 2,000 years, they ruled southwest Florida and the Everglades coast, a population reaching into the tens of thousands, commanding tribute from other nations, without ever planting a crop. They lived on the estuaries, engineering canals and walled fish traps to harvest them. They stacked oyster shells into mounds up to 30 feet high to build their towns, including their capital, Kalos, on Mound Key, and paddled dugout canoes as far as Cuba. A kingdom rose out of the water here. It ran on seafood, not wheat. Fact 30. Bigger than Los Angeles. Most people picture mangroves somewhere tropical, Belize, Indonesia, the far side of the world. America's own mangrove wilderness is bigger than the city of Los Angeles. Along the Everglades' southern and western edge runs the largest mangrove forest in the continental United States. More than 550 square miles of red, black, and white mangroves, holding over 90% of all the mangroves in Florida. Their roots store carbon roughly 10 times faster than a tropical forest, and they break storm surge before it ever reaches the coast. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew flattened 70,000 acres of it in a single night, a living seawall, half an hour from Miami's beaches. Fact 29. The rocket in the swamp. The space race is supposed to live at Cape Canaveral and Houston, but the most powerful solid-fuel rocket motor ever built was fired 3 times out here in the Everglades, then abandoned where it stood. In the 1960s, Aerojet General sank 2 silos into the marsh 5 miles from the national park and tested the AJ-260. Nearly 22 feet across, loaded with 3.4 million pounds of propellant, producing 5.4 million pounds of thrust. The night firings lit the sky for 80 miles. Then, in 1969, NASA chose liquid fuel. The engineers packed up, and one of the motors was simply left in its silo. It's still down there, a record-breaking rocket rusting under the sawgrass. Fact 28. The last panthers. Around 1970, the entire Florida panther population, the only cougars left east of the Mississippi, had collapsed to roughly 6 animals. 6. Today, there are between 120 and 230, and nearly everyone lives in and around the Everglades and Big Cypress, on about 5% of the cat's historic range. They'd grown so inbred by the 1990s that biologists released 8 female Texas pumas in 1995 just to keep the bloodline alive. A single panther needs around 200 square miles to roam, and that range now presses right up against the suburbs of Naples and Fort Myers. The biggest killer of Florida panthers isn't disease, and it isn't starvation. It's cars. That's fact 28. Quick thing before we keep going. The comments on these videos are genuinely the best part. So if I miss something about the Everglades, put it down there. I read them. And while you're thinking about it, a friend of mine wants a word.
Bully! The man in the arena likes and subscribes, so don't be timid. Smash that subscribe button by thunder!
Right. Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, where were we? Fact 27. Evolved in a decade. We're taught evolution takes thousands of years. The Everglades snail kite didn't have that long. This hawk eats almost nothing but apple snails, prying them from their shells with a hooked, specialized bill. And by the early 2000s, with the native snails failing, the bird had crashed to just a few hundred. Then an invasive species, the island apple snail from South America, arrived 2 to 3 times the size of the native kind. Instead of finishing the kite off, it fed it. Within about a decade, the kites measurably grew, beaks and bodies roughly 10% larger, to crack the bigger shells, and the population climbed back toward 3,000. An endangered bird pulled off the edge by an invasion by rebuilding its own skull. Fact 26. Missiles in the marsh. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, the US Army needed somewhere to aim its air defenses at Cuba, 160 miles away, so it built a missile base inside Everglades National Park. HM-69 went operational in 1964, armed with Nike Hercules missiles designed to carry nuclear warheads with yields up to 40 kilotons. For scale, the bomb that leveled Hiroshima was 15. For 14 years, weapons capable of that sat in launch barns, while spoonbills and alligators went about their day a few hundred yards away. The Park Service had issued the Army a permit to do it. The base shut down in 1979, and 22 of its buildings still stand. The only restored Nike site in the country, now open for ranger tours inside a national park. Fact 25. The giant nobody names. Right beside the famous national park sits a wilderness nearly the size of Rhode Island that most Americans have never heard of. Big Cypress covers 729,000 acres, and in 1974, it became the first national preserve in US history, created in part to kill a plan to build a massive jet port in the middle of the swamp. Its water quietly feeds the western Everglades and Florida Bay, and it holds prime territory for the Florida panther. And the name fools everyone. The big isn't the trees. Most of the cypress here is small, even dwarfed. Big describes the sheer reach of the swamp. People come expecting giants and find a forest standing knee-deep in black water. Fact 24. The flower that floats. In the strand swamps west of the Everglades grows a flower that looks like it's hovering in midair. The ghost orchid has no leaves and almost no visible stem, just a single white bloom suspended against the dark. It isn't a trick, and it isn't a parasite. The orchid photosynthesizes through its own flattened green roots, gripping a tree only for support. Fewer than 2,000 survive in the entire United States, most of them in one preserve called Fakahatchee, and only about 5 to 10% flower in any given year. It's so coveted that a 1994 plot to poach and clone it became a best-selling book and a Hollywood film. A wildflower that appears to levitate and barely exists. Fact 23. The engineer with teeth. The American alligator, pulled off the endangered list in 1987, isn't just the Everglades' top predator. It's the reason much of the system survives the dry season. Using jaws and claws, gators dig out gator holes, clearing muck from depressions in the limestone until they hold water year-round. When the marsh dries down, those holes become the last open water for miles. Fish, turtles, frogs, and snails crowd into them, and the herons, egrets, and wood storks follow to feed. The gator gets a stocked pond at its doorstep. Everything else gets to survive until the rains return. Pull the alligators out, and the dry season refuges disappear with them. A predator most people want gone is quietly keeping the entire food web alive. Fact 22. Islands people built. Scattered across the marsh are thousands of teardrop-shaped tree islands, patches of hardwood forest riding just a foot or two above the water. That small rise is everything. It lets royal palms, orchids, and dozens of flood-intolerant species grow where the open marsh can't, packing 2 to 3 times the biodiversity of the sawgrass around them. The shapes aren't random. They're stretched out in the direction the water flows, like wakes frozen into the land. And many aren't fully natural. Evidence shows native peoples lived on them as long as 1,200 years ago, and the shell, bone, and refuse they left behind enriched the soil, in some cases helping build the islands themselves. A forest growing on the remains of an earlier people. Fact 21. The grass that isn't. The river of grass is barely grass at all. The sawgrass that blankets 2/3 of the Everglades is a sedge, botanically closer to papyrus than to anything in your lawn, and it has ruled this landscape for at least 5,000 years. Run a finger down a blade and it'll cut you. The edges carry rows of tiny backward-facing teeth, which is exactly where the name comes from. It thrives because the water is so nutrient-starved. Add fertilizer and it loses, overtaken by cattail. A single plant can throw up to 4,000 sprouts from one flowering. An entire iconic landscape, named for a plant that isn't what we call it, and one that'll draw blood if you grab it wrong. Fact 20. He bought Florida. In 1881, a Philadelphia saw manufacturer named Hamilton Diston bought 4 million acres of Florida, more land than Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Delaware combined, for 25 cents an acre. At the time, it was the largest single land purchase by one person in American history, and Diston's plan was simple: drain the Everglades and sell the dry ground as farmland. He dug canals for 6 years. Then the summer rains came and quietly swallowed it all back. By 1887, the state had declared his drainage a failure. Diston died bankrupt in 1896. He'd paid roughly $1 million for half of South Florida, and the swamp simply refused to leave. He was the first person to try to drain it. He would not be the last. Fact 19. A highway became a dam. When the Tamiami Trail opened in 1928, it connected Tampa to Miami across the bottom of the state, and without anyone intending it, it built a 90-year dam across the Everglades. The road cut straight through the system's path, and its solid roadbed blocked the slow southern sheet of water that fed the national park. Water stacked up on the north side. The park to the south went thirsty, drying out and catching fire. Undoing it has cost around $100 million in bridges and roadbed removals that, by 2021, let 220 billion gallons a year flow south again. The final stretch is still under construction. A single highway starved an entire ecosystem, 1 mile of asphalt at a time. Fact 18. The smallest post office. On the edge of the swamp sits the smallest operating post office in the United States, and it was never meant to be a post office at all. The Ochope Station measures 61.3 square feet, smaller than most walk-in closets. It began life as an irrigation pipe shed on a tomato farm. When a fire destroyed the town's general store in 1953, the postmaster pressed the shed into service as a temporary mail stop. That temporary stop is still running more than 70 years later, serving the Miccosukee, the Seminole, and 3 surrounding counties. When the highway was later widened, they didn't tear it down or rebuild it. They just rolled the whole building back out of the way. Fact 17. The river they rebuilt. The Kissimmee River once wound 100 miles down to Lake Okeechobee through a floodplain 2 miles wide. Between 1962 and 1971, the Army Corps bulldozed it straight into a 56-mile drainage canal, 300 feet across, that drained 50,000 acres of wetland and collapsed the fish and bird populations living off it. It was supposed to be permanent. It wasn't. Starting in 1999, crews backfilled 22 miles of that canal and brought 44 miles of the old meandering river back to life, rehydrating 40 square miles of floodplain. By 2021, the work was done, and 159 bird species had returned. We unstraightened a river, and it came back. Fact 16. The first of its kind. Every national park before it had been set aside for something you could photograph: a canyon, a geyser, a mountain range. Everglades National Park, dedicated by President Truman on December 6, 1947, was the first in America protected for something you mostly can't see: its biodiversity. There are no peaks here, no waterfalls, no postcard overlook. The case for saving it was the living system itself, the web of water, grass, fish, and birds. At 1.5 million acres, it's the largest subtropical wilderness in the country, and one of only 3 places on Earth to hold UNESCO World Heritage status, a wetland of international importance listing, and biosphere reserve status at once. A park created not for the view, but for what was alive inside it. Fact 15. The Unconquered. The United States fought 3 wars to force the Seminole and Miccosukee peoples out of Florida and never finished the job. As the Army pushed in, they withdrew deep into the Everglades, into cypress strands and tree islands the soldiers couldn't navigate, where disease and disorientation did more damage to the troops than any battle. The Second Seminole War, from 1835 to 1842, fought in part under a leader named Osceola, became the longest and costliest war the country ever waged against a native nation, and it ended not with surrender, but with an American officer simply declaring it over. A few hundred people held out in the swamp and were never defeated, and no peace treaty was ever signed. Their descendants won federal recognition as the Seminole tribe in 1957 and the Miccosukee in 1962, and they live here today, sovereign, and by their own word, unconquered. Fact 14. The storm that built the dike. On the night of September 16, 1928, a Category 4 hurricane drove Lake Okeechobee straight over its low earthen rim. The water rose at the south shore by as much as an inch a minute, and a wall of it swept across the farming towns below: Belglade, South Bay, Pahokee. At least 2,500 people died, most of them black migrant farm workers with no way out and no warning. At least 1,600 were buried together at Port Mayaca. In response, the state ringed the lake with the Herbert Hoover Dike, 85 miles of earth, tall enough to hold the water back for good. But it didn't just stop the floods. It severed the lake from the Everglades it had fed for 5,000 years. Fact 13. The Sea of Grass underwater. At the foot of the Everglades lies Florida Bay, and on its floor is one of the largest continuous seagrass meadows on Earth, the nursery for nearly every fish, shrimp, lobster, and crab in South Florida's waters. It runs on a single ingredient: fresh water arriving from the Everglades to keep the bay from turning too salty. In the summer of 1987, that flow failed. The bay went hypersaline, and the seagrass died in a collapse scientists had never recorded for any tropical seagrass anywhere in the world. Sponges followed, then the fish. A meadow the size of a small sea, killed by the absence of a river. Fact 12. Poisoned by a teaspoon. The Everglades evolved as one of the most nutrient-starved ecosystems on the planet. Natural phosphorus levels run as low as 5 to 10 parts per billion, almost nothing. That near emptiness is the whole design. Then fertilizer from the farms upstream began draining in, pushing levels past 200 parts per billion in places. To this system, that isn't food, it's a poison. The native sawgrass and open sloughs get smothered and replaced by dense walls of cattail, which look lush and green but are biological deserts, silent of fish and birds. Tens of thousands of acres have already flipped, an ecosystem killed not by too little, but by too much. Fact 11. The lake turns green. Every few summers, Lake Okeechobee erupts. Roughly 600 metric tons of phosphorus pour into it each year, and in the heat the water blooms with toxic blue-green algae, cyanobacteria that turn the surface the color of paint. In 2023, a bloom covered more than 400 square miles, larger than the city of Los Angeles. these aren't harmless. The toxins they produce are linked to liver disease and neurological illness, and one was detected in a West Palm Beach drinking water supply in 2021. When the lake rises, the Army Corps is forced to flush that green water east and west into the coastal rivers. In 2018, a combined algae and red tide disaster tied to those discharges cost Southwest Florida tourism $2.6 billion. A lake poisoned, then opened like a valve onto the coast. Fact 10. It has to burn. Fire isn't a disaster in the Everglades. It's a requirement, as essential to the system as water. Lightning ignites the marsh through the summer, peaking in June and July, clearing out woody growth and resetting the open sawgrass that the wading birds and ground-nesting birds depend on. Until 1951, people didn't even believe lightning could start these fires. The Park Service built lookout towers and learned otherwise. There are two kinds. Wet season fires sweep harmlessly across the surface above the waterline. But when the land has been overdrained, dry season fires burn down into the peat itself, 2 to 3 feet deep, incinerating soil that took thousands of years to form. The healthy version of this fire grows the marsh back within weeks. The broken version burns the ground out from under it. Fact 9. Do not eat the fish. Across nearly 1 million acres of the Everglades, the state of Florida tells you not to eat the bass. The largemouth bass here can carry mercury at over 1.5 parts per million, among the highest levels measured anywhere, and do not eat advisories have stood since the 1980s. The strange part is where it comes from. This mercury isn't mostly falling from the sky, it's being manufactured in the water. Sulfate running off the sugarcane fields feeds bacteria that convert ordinary mercury into methylmercury, the form that climbs the food chain and concentrates in the fish. The farms don't just send phosphorus downstream, they turn the swamp into a machine for building poison. Fact 8. The mat that runs everything. The single most important organism in the Everglades is one almost no visitor ever notices. It's periphyton, a spongy, olive-green mat of algae and microbes that carpets the marsh floor, and it quietly does 3 jobs at once. It forms the base of the entire food web, feeding the snails and small fish that everything larger depends on. It builds the limestone-rich soil beneath the prairies, and it's so sensitive to pollution that scientists use it as the system's early warning light. When phosphorus rises, the mat collapses within a season. Step into a healthy marsh and you can feel it underfoot, springy and dense, like a waterlogged mattress. The whole Everglades rests on a layer of slime most people would never look at twice. Fact 7. The coast is drowning now. Sea level off South Florida has risen about 9 inches in the last century, and because the Everglades is almost perfectly flat, that small rise reaches a long way inland. The land slopes just an inch or 2 per mile, so 9 inches of ocean pushes the salt line roughly 4 to 5 miles into what used to be freshwater marsh. And it doesn't stop there. When salt hits the freshwater peat, it kills the roots holding that soil together. The peat collapses, the ground drops, and the marsh drowns for good. In one documented event, a single salt episode cost as much elevation as a decade of sea level rise. You can watch it in aerial photos taken 30 years apart. Where tall sawgrass stood, there's open water and dying mangrove. Not a future threat, a present one. Fact 6. The largest repair ever attempted. What people broke over a century, they're now trying to rebuild, and it's the most ambitious ecological repair project in human history. The comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, signed into law in 2000, spans the full 18,000 square mile system across 16 counties, with nearly 200 separate construction projects, and a price tag that has climbed from an estimated $7.8 billion to somewhere north of $16 billion. It means rebuilding rivers, tearing out levees, building reservoirs the size of towns, and retiming the flow of water across half of South Florida. 25 years in, it's still only partly finished, and in February 2026, parts of Miami-Dade were put under water restrictions while the work crawled on. We are trying to replumb a wilderness. Nobody has ever attempted anything close. Fact 5. The ground is disappearing. The Everglades sits on peat, black, spongy soil built up over 5,000 years from dead sawgrass that never fully rotted underwater. In places, it's 8 feet deep, the largest single body of organic soil on the planet. But peat only survives underwater. The moment you drain it and expose it to air, it begins to oxidize, shrink, and burn away. and once it's gone, it does not come back in any human time frame. Since drainage began, the Everglades has lost roughly 900 million tons of it. South of Lake Okeechobee, the farmland built on that soil has sunk several feet below the lake beside it. They didn't just drain the swamp, they set fire to the floor of South Florida, slowly, and it's still burning. Fact 4. Miami drinks the Everglades. The Everglades isn't a wilderness sealed off from the cities. It's the reason the cities have water. As it flows south, the marsh recharges the Biscayne Aquifer, a shallow bed of porous limestone that the EPA has formally designated the sole source of drinking water for Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, and Monroe counties. More than 5 million people. The aquifer sits less than 100 feet down, so thin that rising seas already threaten to push salt into it permanently. And because the cities are paved, their own rainfall runs off instead of soaking in. The Everglades is the tap. Drain it, salt it, or pave over it, and the water under 5 million people goes with it. Fact 3. The empty sky. A century ago, the Everglades held one of the greatest concentrations of birds in North America. Wading birds in the dry season numbered somewhere around 2 million, in colonies so vast that early accounts describe the noise carrying for miles, and the sky darkening when they took flight. Then came the plume hunters, then the draining, then the broken water cycle that scrambled the timing their feeding depends on. Today, nesting in the southern Everglades is down about 93% from the 1930s, from roughly 265,000 nesting birds to fewer than 20,000. The wildlife you see out there can still look wild and full. It's a remnant. What you're looking at is about 7% of what was here, and almost no one alive remembers the rest. Fact 2. A river with no banks. Here's the thing nobody tells you when they call it a swamp. The Everglades is a river. Not a metaphor, a literal one, just shaped wrong for the word. It runs from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay, up to 60 miles wide and only inches deep, moving so slowly you can't see it move. The whole peninsula tilts just 2 inches per mile, and that's enough. The water creeps south across the limestone in a single sheet, sometimes covering a mile a day, more often barely crawling. No channel, no banks, no current you can point to. You can wade out into the middle of it, look down at water that seems perfectly still, and be standing in the middle of a river the size of a small state, flowing right past your knees. Fact 1. The river of grass. We've been circling the real secret this whole time. Everything you've heard so far, the gators and crocs, the missile base, the vanished birds, the burning soil, the water under Miami. None of it is the hidden thing. The hidden thing is the Everglades itself, because it was never a swamp. In 1947, a writer named Marjorie Stoneman Douglas gave it the only name that ever fit, the River of Grass. And once you see it that way, the whole place reorganizes in your mind. The 18,000 square miles aren't a wasteland. They're a single living river, running from a chain of lakes near Orlando all the way to the sea. The sawgrass isn't filler, it's the surface of the water. Lake Okeechobee isn't a separate lake. It's the river's heart. The drainage, the dike, the highway dam, the dying bay, the empty sky, all of it is one story. What happens when you cut a river into pieces and forget it was ever flowing? People have spent 150 years treating the Everglades as a swamp to be conquered, then a swamp to be saved. It was never a swamp. It's the slowest river on Earth, hidden in plain sight, the size of a state, and we very nearly drained it before we understood we were standing in it. That's the Everglades, a river so wide and so slow we mistook it for a swamp for 150 years. If one of these facts rearranged how you see the place, tell me which in the comments. And if you want more of America hiding in plain sight, I've already pulled apart California's Central Valley and the Florida Panhandle. Both are on screen now. Go dig in.